Okay, good afternoon. Okay, so good afternoon. We'll get going in just a second. Until then, we'll do I didn't really actually do much in the market today. Where do I stand? Uh, about the same. Nothing earth shattering. Yeah, nothing earth shattering. So, um, an interesting day today because I've kind of made it a point to engage in some online forums on some controversial issues. And, you know, if you are someone who engages online in some of these, they're just amazing. And it never ceases to amaze me the level of groupthink that exists in these chat rooms. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter. It just if you go into a Democratic room, they're going to destroy you. If you go into a Republican room, they're going to destroy you. And the assumption is that if you're not with us, you're against us. And so I'll talk about some of those today. Elizabeth, how are you? Good to see you. But it's just been an interesting day watching this. So one is related to Guilford, this critical race theory debate in Guilford is going on. You have tonight the Republican town committee is meeting. Apparently there are some members that are trying to end any CRT or critical race theory being taught in schools. There's a debate on whether there is actually any CRT being taught in schools. There seems to be a lack of understanding of what it is. I look at critical race theory as a lens at which we look at history as opposed to a specific ideology. But we'll talk about that a little bit. But some of the comments are just amazing. And then also today, I looked into the child tax credit. Chris Murphy posted something. I responded, and then all hell broke loose. And it's amazing to watch. It's just amazing to watch. You can't say anything about anything without political ideologues attacking. And what's interesting about this is when we started this podcast, when we first started a year and a half ago, and I had individual ones on occasion before that with some guests, but the idea remains the same, that when we take away the 10% on the left and the 10% on the right who are, for lack of a better term, nuts, crazy, whatever, 80% of the people, I think, mostly agree on things. 80% of the people are mostly socially liberal, fiscally conservative. They want to see their money spent well. They don't mind spending on those in need, but they want to see it spent well. The online social debates are dominated by those 10% on each side. If you go in and look at the Simply Guilford page and look at some of the debates, there's like 12 people, but 400 comments. So it's these comments are dominated. We look at it and say it's awful, it's terrible. It's a very, very tiny fraction of people who get involved. Even on Chris Murphy's page, who has tens of thousands of followers, those that are active in posting is a small number. And so we can't run the risk. Sometimes we speak in generalities and saying politics is nuts and everybody's crazy. No, there's a small percentage of people that are that way, and they dominate the conversation. They're not representative of the vast majority of Americans, the vast majority of people that are voting or part of the political discourse or impacted by our political discourse. And so we try to make this podcast for that 80%. Now, I've said this before. If I want to make the most amount of money possible, I would pick a side. You have guaranteed money to be made being Fox News or MSNBC. There's a big enough audience there. And because they're passionate and rabid, they will spend, they will donate, they will, all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to take a different route. I'm trying to say, what's the 80%? What's the reasonable approach to this stuff? Who do we represent the most, the largest demographic? And in most towns you even go to, Branford has more Democrats than Republicans, but it has more unaffiliated than anybody. Most people are not part of the rabid groups of people on social media or even active in politics locally. They care. They're impacted by it. But those crazy groups are the ones that dominate the conversation. That said, 2 nights ago, we had the Republicans in Branford nominated Jamie Cosgrove again. as first selectman. No surprise there. He's incredibly popular. I think he's fairly bipartisan. Could it be an interesting race? Sure. Every election, the Democrats raise plenty of money. They have regular donors that write large checks. In this case, the person running on the Democratic side worked for unions, so you're going to get outside union groups giving him money. Nothing illegal about that. I don't know if you want that or not, but it happens all over the place. I think you have at the top of the Democratic ticket two retired people who have time. They'll likely knock on a lot of doors. I have given my opinion already about Mr. Brockett and the type of person he is. Again, I have no idea if he's a good father. I have no idea if he's a husband. I have no idea about any of that personal life stuff. What I know is his record as an elected official has been less than stellar. And he's running against a guy who, in my opinion, has a stellar public record. The running mate for Jamie is Angie Higgins, who is, it's kind of an emotional thought because her husband passed away last year, who was Jamie's running mate for the last 4 terms. So he's been by Jamie's side. When we talked about this on this podcast, when Jamie was selecting her, Ray Dunbar was trying to get Brockett in onto the Board of Selectmen. Once Angie's name came out, Dunbar sent an email to Jamie saying, I'm not supporting her. And then by the time it got to the board, he had changed his mind and is supporting her, and he publicly supported her. So it was controversial. I think Angie's very well loved, and she's quite frankly the smart one in that relationship with her and her husband. So she adds a lot to the table, knows what she's talking about. A good addition, I think, to the Board of Selectmen. So it had been a while since a woman had been on there, I think, since the last Democrat was there before Unk. That said, last night was a big night for Branford as well. We continued a stream of a lot of infrastructure projects getting done and moving forward. The animal shelter passed unanimously. There were some members on both sides that made that a headache. We talked about this. We listened to one Democrat get up and embarrass himself going after Jim Finch a month ago or so. Mark Riccio embarrassed himself in the Board of Finance meeting, literally got up at the Board of Finance meeting and said, I don't know much about this, but I'm voting against it. Last night said he didn't mean that, and he's voting for it. Who the hell knows? At the end of the day, everybody voted for it. It was unanimous, and that project's moving forward. And listen, it's an election season. There's some things you don't vote against if it's an election season. And one of those things is an animal shelter. And it's, the questions raised are legit about our animal shelter. We do far more than just the needs of Branford and North Branford at the Cosgrove Animal Shelter. And so that can bring about questions. Should we be paying for the services we render? We have animals there from all over the country at times. We're certainly a no-kill shelter. And so there are legitimate questions to be asked on should that be our role. That said, we have a fairly unique situation where Laura Bourbon and the animal shelter raise a ton of money on their own. Every year they come forward for the budget time and they never ask for a significant increase. They take raising money and to fund some of these other efforts seriously. So I feel like we have to give them credit for that. It's not their fault that COVID came and jacked up the price of lumber, the price of wire, and all the other materials needed for this project. And there's no real evidence that if we waited a couple years, it would drop significantly. Inflation is high. We don't know if that will end anytime soon. And it made sense to just move forward from a numbers standpoint and get this project done. So that's a long list of projects that you're going to see wrap up. Pretty soon you'll have a grand opening on the senior center, the community house, which we were not able to have last year because of COVID. We've had, I'm just thinking of all the grand openings at the Indian Neck Firehouse. We had a little ceremony at the Branford Hills Park that exists. So these are new things. The Shoreline Greenway Trail, the Ecology Park. The school won't be done this year. Probably the pool will bring us to the beginning of next year, but Walsh Intermediate School. So obviously the Blackstone Library and a lot of projects in Branford getting done. That's a good thing to see. A lot of infrastructure spending. And still the overriding fact is that the mill rate has stayed low, lower than all of our neighboring towns. And we have significant amount of money in the bank that we're holding on to. including funding things like coastal resiliency, which we are leading the state on. So a very good time to be in Branford. Good to see everybody bipartisan come together last night and pass that. So from a discussion standpoint, we're going to start with the child tax credit. So many of you may know or may not know, if you make under a certain amount of money and have children, you are getting money every month for the next 6 months. And to give you an idea what this is, I want to read it. Who qualifies? For many families, the amount $2,000 per child starts to phase out above $200,000. So you have single parents making up to $200,000, or married couples with incomes up to $400,000 are going to get some of this. And they're going to get either checks for about $450 or $500 to $600 a month based on the age of your child. If you have multiple children, you may get a significant check every month. Now, there's a couple caveats to this. One is, this is not just free money. Two, this is a tax credit you were normally able to take. So they increased it a little. They're giving it to you ahead of time. So the tax credit you were normally expecting to take every year, if you take this money, you won't be able to take at the end of the year. So there was a theory that, hold on, I want to get my money first. That's okay. I don't want the government to have it. I'd rather have it. Okay. But the downside of this, so Chris Murphy today on Facebook, and he's in marketing, and he asked a question: how is Biden's child tax credit helping you and your family? Now, it makes it sound like it's just free money. It's not, but that's fine. My answer was, it's not going to do much. Now, if you want to know what it's like to be attacked, that's what you put. There's nothing crazy about that statement. It's relatively true. All you're doing is getting the money you would have gotten otherwise earlier. If you make more money this year, based on compared to last year, so if you made $80,000 this year and you make $120,000 this year, you may owe money back. If it's under 50, I think you're protected, but you may owe money back. But the main reason when it comes to money and the government giving out checks, Social Security exists for one reason. People suck when it comes to saving money. People have nothing saved. And to counteract that, when we have depressions, when we have downtime, when people lose jobs, Social Security is there to make sure there's some minimum level of money coming in once you retire. It's a small amount. It's not a significant amount of money. If you're married and you may have double that, that may be helpful. But it's there because people suck at saving money. Despite billions of dollars being given away in the last couple of years because of COVID, people are still without money because they don't know how to save. They don't know how to invest. We're not taught this. It's not prioritized in our school system. It's not something prioritized in life. I have seen so many kids getting free and reduced lunch that have an $800 phone in their hand, that have $400 sneakers on their feet. It is amazing, the idea that we simply cannot save money as a nation. Now, some people do when they get ahead. So this idea of saying, wait a minute, can we please, let's send money to people to help them. The idea is that they're going to use it for kids. I don't see any evidence that the vast majority of the money will be used that way. Many people, when they got their stimulus checks, didn't use it for basic needs. They either didn't need the money, so they saved it, or used it eating out, which could help an economic a little bit, or invested stock. Many people bought stock with it. It was not money they needed to live. Giving back $300, $400, $500, $600 a month to people who may not be very good managing money to begin with isn't helping. So I asked a very simple question. Which percentage of the amount given back do we think is actually going to kids? Nobody wants to answer that question. If you ask that question on the Chris Murphy page, the groupthink sets in and then you just get attacked. You're crazy and you must be Republican and you must hate kids and you hate puppies and children. Okay, that's fine. That said, taking money and saving it for people is not unprecedented. We do that. It's not out of the realm. It's not crazy by any means. We do that now. Realizing that people cannot save money on their own is a real thing. And I would rather take that money as opposed to handing it in checks to people and hoping they use it for their kids, and actually spend it on programs that help them get back to work. Spend it on programs like childcare or healthcare that we know for sure is directed at those children. One of the single greatest things you can do is fund childcare. If you allow childcare for parents and allow them to go to work, their chance of getting ahead is much, much better. Now, some parents don't want to go use childcare, but at least available to them so that we know that money is being used for children. If we give money to childcare as opposed to here's a blank check, we know it's not going to garbage or something else. It's not going to a want, it's going to a need. And if a parent takes advantage of that, they have the opportunity to get employment, a paycheck, and possibly move up the ladder, or use that childcare to go get school or go get credits or go get educated to make more money, to get more benefits, to do more. There's far more better ways to use that money than just handing people checks. It's great politically. Care for Kids is not, it's fairly funded. There's far more that can go into Care for Kids. It's nowhere near. It's very difficult actually to get it. So it's not fully funded by any means. That said, you find a way to give these parents childcare. We're taking away the reasons they can't go back to work. I'd rather spend money on services that lets people go back to work, be productive members of society, than stay home, here's some extra money. Because that's a hand up. It's still spending. It's not, Republicans cut back 20% of everything. We're still spending the money. We still have to tax the wealthy to make that money some way, shape, or form. But now we're spending it in a way that we know is going towards kids, that we know is going towards a path for adults who have kids to get back to work. And right now, everybody's hiring. So I think we missed the mark on this. Now it's 6 months. What happens? Some Democrats want to keep it going forever. Some are against that. We'll see what happens in the near future. This is also a discussion on a state level. Sean Scanlon proposed paying out a child tax credit. We talked about this. The idea on its own merits makes sense. Well, it'll help people. But we know it goes to the neediest people if we fund programs to a greater extent like Care for Kids. Part of the problems with Care for Kids, and they're working on this. I know Robin Comey's working on some of these things. It wasn't always available for education. So if you were a parent who wanted to go to school, it wasn't available for that. The other weird caveat with this is in order to get Care for Kids, you had to have a job. And it takes like 3 to 4 months of getting approved for it. So how, as an adult, do you go to a job and say, listen, Christina, I work with many employers and many people have applied for it, and it's very difficult. They go through hell to get it. Secondly, you have that lead time. So people come in and apply for a job, say, I'll apply for Care for Kids once I'm given the job, then have to find a way to fund it for 4 to 6 weeks before it kicks in. That's a problem. So that needs to change as well. More money instead of direct checks towards those programs makes more sense. Head Start and school readiness is for families who don't work. Okay. Go ahead, Christina, fill me in on what you're referencing there. I can tell you from actual experience that we've had people come and apply at some of the companies I work with, told us, we're going to apply for Care for Kids. You can't apply until you have the job. Gave them the job and said, I can't come for 4 to 6 weeks unless somebody can fund childcare until that time. That's a problem. We had Robin Comey on here who told us it doesn't cover education, and she was working to fix that. I would rather take the money that we're giving as a tax credit and put it towards those programs. Let's make it easier to make sure those things are taken care of. And quite frankly, Christina, part of the problem is you just mentioned 3 different programs. The average parent looking for these programs doesn't even know they exist. Not even close. So they've got to figure out what program to go to. And they're not, brain surgeons. Which program works? They apply to 3 or 4 of them. They get on the phone. They're on there for 3 or 4 hours. We've seen this process play out a million times. There has to be an easier way. I'd rather see that money go towards programs that help people get back in the workforce, as opposed to here's some money. We hope you use it on your kids. And if you happen to make some extra money, I wish I could you 211 info. Listen, you can say this if all you want. We've tried this. Parents have a hard time getting this. It's helpful, but it's a hard time getting it. You have to have a job to get the program. Put short, I'd rather see the program funded. We have actually, I'll take you up on that, Christina, probably tomorrow. Text me she wants to call me and go through this. I would love to go through it with you. Text me or message me through Branford 7, your number, and I will text you. Or you can text me directly, 203-710-6831. Just let me know who you are. But the precedent is there. This is why we have Social Security. This is why we have health care for people that are retired, because the money's not there. People are terrible at saving money on their own. Handing more money to people. What percentage of the stimulus packages that went out do we feel actually went towards actual needs? It's not significant. In fact, many households have far more money now than they ever had before. Okay, let's move on to CRT. So what did I put here as the animal shelter, Branford election, critical child tax, to critical race theory. We talked about this a little bit the other day, and I've had a long conversation with a few people today, one on social media. If you are on the Simply Guilford page, you're going to be like, oh my God, like what is going on? And Guilford is up in arms over this. And there's a small group of people that seem up in arms. I think most people aren't. But CRT, my definition of CRT, and that is based on reading 5 or 6 articles, some academic articles, seeing some interviews on it. I did not listen to the Barry Weiss podcast yet. I know people have sent that to me. I'm a Barry Weiss fan, but I have not listened to it yet. But it is a lens by which we look through things. It's not, hey, we teach X. This is not learning algebra. It is, we have events in our history, and let's try to take this viewpoint and see what it says. I don't think it's up for debate that race has played a significant role in American history. But we can go a step further and say it's not up for debate that race and racial issues haven't played a significant role in worldwide history, in human history. This is normal. No matter what you believe in the Bible, there's racism all over the Bible. One chosen race is all over the Bible. Wars, crusades, whether it's for religious reasons or color of skin or race or where they're from or the Middle East or whatever it is, race problems are not new. America didn't invent this problem. That said, we built a country on a premise that someone based on the color of their skin was worth 3/5 of someone else. That's built into the fabric of America. We've changed that law, but it doesn't mean those laws don't have forever impacts. What critical race theory does is say, if we stop and say race has a role in these rules and these laws that we've passed, in our cultural norms, in our corporate rules and processes, do we get a different look at them? So we'll give you an example. We talked yesterday about the drug laws and the impact those have had. But what if we start and say, and this is one of the tenets of critical race theory, that real change, especially on social issues, have changed once white people are impacted. So rights for Black people or minorities are set aside, talked about, but set aside until white people are impacted. And to a certain extent, that's true. Let's give an example of immigration. We've talked about this idea of closing the borders, and we don't want immigrants here. But the more we talk about that, very soon after, we begin to realize something. There's no one cleaning hotels. There's no one doing labor on farms. There's significant shortages for labor in many other areas that immigrants have traditionally done. We're talking about Mexican immigrants over the border. At that point, according to CRT, white people are impacted. And thus, that's when you start seeing change. Over time, I would say corporations began to realize that Black people had money and they can spend. White people saw the benefits of giving them more rights, allowing them to do more things because it could line their pockets. Let's not pretend greed is not part of our nation. The issue I have with that, and I don't have any issue with having this discussion. In fact, this discussion should happen. I actually support having this discussion, certainly in college, but in high school as well. I can argue that if you replace white, black, and just say, instead of white, those in power are acting their own best interest, yes, that makes sense. So I don't know if it's strictly race. I'm not convinced of that. It can be. I'm willing to open it up and have that conversation. But look at the impact having this type of conversation with 15, 16, 17-year-old kids who are learning can have moving forward. Do you think as they start their careers in politics, their careers in corporate America, their interaction with others, that if they have these conversations as they're learning, they might be more aware of them moving forward? It may not solve the problem, but you may create a generation of people who are far more aware of the impacts of what they pass and their actions, whether it become their personal actions or their corporate actions or their political actions. Much of CRT is the concept that we may not be individually racist, but as a society, we may have rules and norms that are racist in themselves, whether we wanted to or not. It may not be Jim Crow laws, it may be laws that disproportionately impact another color. And as humans, if in hindsight we look back and can say, wait a minute, this did disproportionately impact somebody, wouldn't we want to correct that? And if there's an extra step in our thought process moving forward, our age at mid-40s or 30s or 20s, or as teenagers, as they make decisions to be more aware of the impact that laws may have, that corporate norms may have, that policies may have, how is that a bad thing? The anger that I've seen from really both sides, what happens with every social media and every argument is, one side says, I want this out of our school. I don't want to be pushing, white guilt or whatever it is. And the other side responds with, you're racist. It happens all the time. There's a million of those all over social media. And as soon as somebody yells racist, it's over. It's going to be insults. You can't have a real discussion. But to intelligent people, this is a logical and a wise discussion to have. And it doesn't just happen when it comes to race. We do this in corporate America all the time. We go back and say, what's the impact of this policy? Negative or positive? On finance, on personnel, on morale, on race issues. These are pretty normal. We don't just, in Christianity, you say, teach history, teach facts. The best classes any student will ever have are ones that teach you and help you think critically and differently. It doesn't mean you have to agree. But something I've said on this podcast a long time, you shouldn't take a stance on anything until you can clearly articulate the opposing view. Sometimes you can't. Like most states have pretty much given up. We have gay marriage is legal. For a long time it was a fight. No one really fights that anymore. There's no other side to that anymore. But on issues of should there be a child tax credit, can you explain why people want it and why someone might be against it? On issues of the Iraq war, should we pull out or not? Can you explain both before you take a stance? Why would we not want a teacher to expand the minds of a student? Now, a good teacher doesn't impose guilt, doesn't make one side feel like they're owed anything. The problems can come when a teacher then says, because of what happened, this should happen next. So we don't want that from a teacher. Those should be something to decide on their own down the road. I don't want a teacher pushing an agenda. But to go through history and analyze our past based on the lenses of other people and other viewpoints is a valuable thing. We did this in school. Did we not in every single school at some point say the Civil War from the South mentality and the North mentality? We all did that. Civil War from a white mentality or a black mentality? We all did that. That's a normal thing. That expands our thinking. It doesn't mean you agree when if you look through the South perspective that we wanted the Civil War. It means that we can now understand where they were coming from. We can empathize with the thoughts and processes they were going through, why they fought. It doesn't mean you agree with it. It doesn't mean you think it was right. But it gives us a much broader understanding of our own past and what we've been through. And here's the thing. Europe has a past of centuries We have a past of a couple hundred years. All of this stuff is relatively new. And so looking back at it only makes us stronger. Stephanie, my concerns stem from the current biased political views some of the teachers are already pushing on our kids. Listen for myself during remote learning. Okay, I agree with you. If a teacher is, instead of pushing, let's look at things, look at the past, is saying, this is what the case is, therefore we must do X. I agree with you. I don't want to hear that from a teacher. The problem is we have hundreds of thousands of teachers. And I don't believe this conversation is new. I think teachers have had this forever. That we have a name for it or an acronym for it adds to it and gives us the evil, the boogeyman. But yes, there are teachers that are not very good at keeping that out. But most teachers are good at it. I have seen teachers push agendas. I've seen colleges do it, but they have the right to do it. They have tenure and they have that academic freedom. In high school, I have seen teachers do that. It's not right. I think our administration should be on top of, don't push the agenda. But looking at history through multiple lenses makes us better people. And it makes us think when we're taking actions moving forward. So if a teacher, for example, is really for reparations and they're teaching this, that's going to seep into their teaching. I don't want that. But if a teacher is saying, listen, we have history and here's this event, and let's look at this event and say, why were these laws passed? And what was the impact of those laws? Let's look at it from those that passed the law. Let's look at it from those from the mindset of a minority that may have been impacted by the law. Let's look at it from those that we didn't think would be impacted by the law, but were eventually. Seeing all those different viewpoints helps us. And hopefully you're here on this podcast because we try to look at different viewpoints and different analysis of the same law, the same bill, the same facts. Yes, you can say the Civil War happened from this year to this year. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed on this year, and Gettysburg happened here, and whatever. What a good teacher says, let's look at perspectives. Let's look at different lenses. And looking at our laws, our civil rights, will allow us to see things we may not see otherwise. Yes, Jim Crow laws were racist. But there may have been other laws. Remember, we're talking hundreds of thousands of laws. We're talking government at a U.S. level, at a state level, and those are vastly different based on where you are in the country. And then towns and counties under that. Thousands of different laws we can look at and say, was there a racist overtone to this law? Or did the law have a racist outcome that may not even been intended? But we can't get there if we don't have that conversation. And so I can't see a reason not to be having that conversation at a high school level, as long as teachers are skilled and making sure the conversation is an exercise and not pushing a particular agenda. But that goes for everything. We can, talk. I've done religious studies with teachers or professors who are very religious, who believed Jesus died on the cross and was resurrected. Okay, you can believe that, but don't push the agenda. You want to study religion, go ahead. You want to push an agenda, it's a different story. Teachers should be skilled at not pushing an agenda, but teaching kids, I would say high school and up, to look at history through different lenses. It's eye-opening, and it's valuable. And it could be a building block for serious change in the future. If you have an opinion on CRT, please send it in. I'd love to get an email or messages on it. We'll talk about it more next week. It is divisive in Guilford. I think overall, the voters will vote the other way. These new people coming on just for that issue probably doesn't make for a very good Board of Education by any means. I think in some cases, the superintendent may have handled it well. I've seen some quotes he's made that haven't been all that helpful. But teachers teaching students to look through things through a different lens is a good idea. It makes us better. Let's just make sure our teachers are skilled at doing that. Okay, that's it for the week. We will be back next week on Monday at 4:00. Guys, thanks for joining me. And, as always, we're going to talk about what can be sensitive topics because we're not going to shy away from them because they're sensitive. You can disagree with me. You can come on here and disagree and give another viewpoint. We look at things as historians. We're trying to look at real life events as historians. The impacts of those things, winners, losers, that sort of thing. We're not making a stance on serious racial issues. We're looking at what's in front of us, the issues we face in historical context. And all of us have been in, I give it the example all the time about dropping the atomic bombs after the World War on Japan. There are legitimate arguments to be had that that's awful and evil and disgusting. At the same time, there's a legitimate argument to be had that ended the war early and saved hundreds of thousands of lives. That's a real conversation. There could be passion involved there, but it's a real conversation. We apply that same mentality, looking at both sides or 3 or 4 sides to the issues we look at, whether it's a child tax credit or CRT or something on a local level, an animal shelter. We want to apply that same thought process, looking at all the sides, analyzing them to everything we look at. And I appreciate the comments and the thought processes. Send them in, and hopefully we can keep this going. I will see you Monday at 4 o'clock. I hope you all have an amazing weekend. Until then, have a great night.